5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
You're listening to Relentless. This is the show for high performers who are driven and committed to being at their best. Nick Peterson and Jonathan Montgomery, co-founders of Relentless Dietetics, are your hosts.
Welcome to the Relentless Podcast. I'm Nick Peterson, hanging out again today with Jonathan Montgomery.
What is up?
And the Dr. Trevor Cashy.
Again, you make it sound like it's a chore.
It's my favorite chore. Yeah. I promise it's my favorite chore, though.
Here we are again.
Yeah.
Gosh. How you guys doing? You guys doing all right?
Well, you know, as usual, we are here to discuss getting a little bit better every day, and I want to talk about that right now because I want to get better today because I'm a little sick. So just a little foreshadowing here. If you hear anybody coughing, hacking, and ruining this podcast in general, that's going to be my fault. So I apologize for that in advance.
At least we know. And that's kind of what we're talking about today, right? Is the importance of knowing what you know and having a pretty good idea of what you don't know. And the reason this is so important is because the interwebs especially make it really easy for everybody to go out and kind of explain what they think they know. And when you try to explain things that you don't fully understand, you end up confusing a lot of people. And sometimes people have this idea, right, that saying, I don't know, or I'm not sure, reflects poorly on them, which you can circle back to the mindset episode where we kind of talk about identifying with not knowing things or not being good at things. But what I've realized, especially spending time with Dr. Cashy, is when people that are believable say or admit that they don't know, it puts them at an advantage over other people who are overestimating their knowledge and aren't aware of their own ignorance.
You know, for me, this comes down to kind of one of those key things we talk about a lot, and that being self-awareness. You know, and it falls back kind of to what we talked about on the previous episode in this concept of you don't know what you know until you know. And that whole informed consumer syndrome where everything just seems to make sense once you've been, you know, conveniently given information, the lights have been flipped on for you. But the flip side of this is not in knowing what you know, but being aware of all the things that you don't know, you know, the stuff that you haven't been exposed to, you couldn't possibly know or trust all the facts to, you know, and being aware of that, knowing that there's a great deal of stuff you don't know, way more than you're able to be capable of knowing. That right there allows you to navigate situations with an open mind and be open and receptive to possibilities that you'd otherwise be shut off towards if you were just so consumed with blindly trusting knowledge, especially knowledge that you don't really possess. It's just, again, it's part of that self-awareness and being aware that there's quite a lot out there that you don't know.
It's a really big problem in academia in like the opposite way, because like if you make a legitimate stance on something, that's like a really big deal. Like if somebody is that sure, it's like sometimes you can hear a pin drop in an audience. And that's where a lot of like a it depends comes from, because so few things make sense out of context that you can get yourself into trouble really fast. And if you look at any writings done by academics, you'll notice that all of it is in the passive voice. And none of it really makes any concrete assertions. And that's something that I have like literally had to beat out of my head, is that it is okay to be sure of things if you are sure. And even if it's in the context of just trying to make a point, if it's using hyperbole or something obnoxious to get your point across, that like there is a difference between really trying to avoid answering the question and then being confident with yourself given the circumstances. Because I know, speaking with other scientists and professors and people of that nature, it's more annoying than it is talking to me, or it's kind of like talking to a lawyer. Like you just don't get a straight answer out of anybody for anything. So like
right.
You spent enough time in school, in the context of the research environment, you learn that, man, I don't know shit. And then it kind of puts you into the position where you're afraid to make any sort of concrete opinion about anything. So I just wanted to lay that out as some personal experiences. Like, it has been effort for me to be okay with basically being comfortable with what I know. And I've always been uncomfortable with what I don't, but being comfortable with what I do know has been an effort.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a negative thing at all to say I don't know or be unsure. Awareness, like Jonathan was mentioning, self-awareness is a better term, because you could be a little bit more or less aware, or a little even sure. You'd be a little more sure, a little less sure. But I think knowing something is dangerous, because once you know a thing, it is really hard to learn a thing, if that makes sense. Something about the, you can't fill a glass, it's already full. I'll also just say real quick, Trevor, I'm interested how you say it's nothing makes sense without context. But I think the danger is that with people that have a little less awareness or maybe a little less knowledge in a field, everything can make sense without context. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you look for something, you'll find it.
Man, we deal with that all the time.
Yeah. And what I've also noticed, too, is that I don't really know if there's a term for this, but I'll kind of pull something else out of my butt, that there's like this knowledge debt, I guess, is something where like you kind of, I guess, borrow from the internet, so to speak, in the context of we're like, okay, Jonathan likes to bring up, I actually brought this up with Nick yesterday, that, all right, I have no idea how to do brain surgery, but I could look it up if I wanted to. Therefore, I could do brain surgery if I needed, right? And it allows people to be confident about the opinions or things that they think they know, because to them, the information is at arm's reach if they require it. And that's also something that I don't know what that's called. I've started calling itself like a knowledge debt in my own head, because like you're kind of halfway sure about knowing something, or think you know something you don't, because you could look it up if you wanted to, which I also think is something that's interesting.
Well, I could tell you, as much as I love you and I trust you, if you were going to go Google brain surgery, I wouldn't want to be the patient. So,
yeah, it's one of those things, where, yeah, man, any skill you want to learn, you can, but how many times are you going to screw it up before you get it right? Finding out the torque you need to put on a car is a little bit different than, I don't know, doing a frontal lobotomy. So kind of a little bit high stakes game you're playing. So yeah, T, I love you, but you're not operating on my brain either.
When I first met him in person and really had interaction and we were talking, and in my head, he is just the smartest dude on the planet, and I still think he is. But the simple things that as a personal trainer or as somebody that's read all of the internet, all nutrition stuff on the internet, trying to have a simple conversation was enlightening because of the amount of times he said, I just don't know, and I'm not really sure anybody does. It honestly makes me think differently and discredits, your hairdresser that says she does know. Because if Dr. Kashi doesn't know, then how could I trust my hairdresser, kind of thing? So admitting the limits of what you are sure about, I think really gives you credibility, contrary to what it may seem counterintuitive.
I think it's worth noting that consensus does not equal correctness. Like, just because everybody agrees that something is correct, to me, has absolutely no bearing on the accuracy at all. Like, at one point in history, it made absolute perfect sense that all the planets orbited in circles, right? It makes perfect sense. Things move around in circles, concentric circles, because things are symmetrical. And then Kepler ran around and said, screw you guys, it's an oval, right? Which makes no sense at all. To move this over to the nutrition side of things, it's also similar with like the dietary fat dilemma, right? People are dying of heart attacks left and right. They cut these people open, see that the person's arteries are clogged with fat. It makes perfect sense that people eat a lot of fat, get their arteries clogged with fat. Like, there is zero about that doesn't make sense. It became common knowledge for decades, right, that consuming fat led to fat in your arteries and then a failed heart. It prompted me to sit back and like, just because everybody agrees on something doesn't really mean a heck of a lot to me. which can make my life exhausting sometimes, but I think it can make everybody's life exciting sometimes too.
It's that whole when Occam's razor goes wrong. Sometimes the simplest answer isn't the best answer. So you got to kind of, dig a little bit deeper sometimes. But the ultimate trust builder to me is when someone answers a question with, I don't know, but, I can try and find out. And that just comes down to them being honest with where they're at, knowing your limitations and not being afraid of them, that whole self-awareness thing. And to me, it's just extremely powerful and refreshing and just all too rare for people to own and admit their limitations rather than just pretend to know everything, especially on the internet. And so sometimes or anytime somebody goes, hey, I don't know, I'll find out. Perfect. I'm going to trust you implicitly from there on out.
Perfect example, whether it be the flat earth or, the sun revolving around the earth or everything moving in circles. When somebody says, I don't know, but I'll find out, or even if it's, I'm pretty sure, but let me double check, something along those lines, it tells me that when the facts change, this person is willing to change their opinion as well. And that's super important to me. Ideology just sucks as a lifestyle.
You always have to be aware that's what taken as fact or assumed correct today may very well be found out to be wrong tomorrow, or at the least not as right as, we once thought it was. As more information presents itself or ways to interpret information change or technology changes, you kind of have to be willing to change with it. That whole dogmatic adherence to anything is typically going to be a recipe for disaster, but yet it's still extremely pervasive. Everybody has that desire to belong or to be right. In the fire service, there's an old saying of 150 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. That kind of encapsulates this method of thinking. And that's kind of how everything was. I mean, why would we wear air packs? They didn't wear air packs. Our grandfathers didn't wear air packs. Why would we air packs? And all these different kind of backwards things in the fire service, but you can extrapolate and put that to any industry. Change is tough. Unless your industry is being on the bleeding edge, you're typically going to be resistant to it. And, while some traditions, they often stand for a reason, simply relying on outdated methods and information and closing yourself off to new, potentially more effective ways of doing anything as a defining characteristic of industry, a pride principle, it's not a very good one. How you've always done things simply isn't enough of a reason to keep doing them. And at least not entertaining the possibility that something better exists, even if that means you have to admit you were wrong. It's not a big deal.
Just for the sake of conversation, it's easy to say, okay, if we don't know for sure, well, then you can't take a stance on anything ever, right? Which is also equally as non-productive, right? It's if you don't ever want to be wrong, it's kind of like that silly saying, like you miss all the shots you don't take, right?
Right.
So it's easy to say, well, we don't know, so I'm just not going to take a stance one way or the other. And I want to say it is okay to say, this is how I feel about the matter based off of the current information we have, right? And then that sets you up to be growth mindset related. If you say, this is how it is, it's never going to change. If you say, this is how I feel about this based off of the best information we got, then you're setting yourself up to grow.
Then the objective is, it's not to be right about what you just said. Like, it's that first conclusion bias, right? Like, we came to this conclusion and now we will fight to keep it. The objective is to continue, and I know you do this really, really well, Trevor, is continue to try and find or get closer to the truth, because context changes, perspective changes, levels of awareness change, and what is obvious to one person may seem ridiculous to another, or what is obvious to you 3 years ago may seem absolutely ridiculous to you right now.
Part of that process is to try and prove yourself wrong over and over.
Yep. Stress test.
If you're ready to get the body you desire without depriving yourself of the foods you enjoy, download your free diet playbook now at www.relentlesspodcast.com.
I think there's so much to this, because let's be honest, it's not a matter of if, but when. You will be wrong at some point. Something will change. History will rewrite itself, and eventually you will be wrong. It's inevitable and only a matter of time. So going through life not being closed off to this possibility, but being open to it and aware that it's coming, man, it's going to allow you to pull the nose up quicker. You're going to be able to make those course corrections sooner and make far less costly mistakes over time than just blindly hammering down, going, full bore on everything when you think you're right, and digging yourself a much deeper hole that you have to climb out of. It's kind of good to kind of always be aware that, this is as right as I can be given this information, but I'm always going to be looking for new information that's more correct, more accurate, and be ready for it to change.
Or in the context of just keeping your own mental resources in check, if there's somebody that presents me with information that is in the position to be authority on the subject, then I will also absorb what that person may say without having to dig through and quadruple check things. Right? Like that's part of why, scientific journals are good, right? Because one, you don't have to do everything yourself. You are kind of counting on the reproducibility of somebody else's efforts to add to your own knowledge banks without having to reinvent the wheel. So I think that that's also important, that updating your own database of information, it's not something that you always have to discover for yourself if you have legitimate resources to pull from.
Part of updating your own knowledge base is understanding cognitive bias, right? Because you can rely on other experts, but you also have to be aware of their own cognitive bias that may be inherent in their particular field or whatever it may be. So that's something, again, that I just bring up because, Trevor, you do it so well.
Well, and to be truthful, like I think the cognitive bias aspect of a lot of things makes it fun. Right? Because to me, it's kind of like my favorite food is carne asada burritos, right? And you can go to 1,000 different Mexican restaurants and you'll get 1,000 different carne asada burritos. And that's kind of how I see cognitive bias with a lot of things, is that people will put their own flavor into whatever they study. And you can always take a look at multiple people who study the same thing, and that will help you draw your conclusion on the subject.
Yep, that's always interesting when people follow like one author or one person. Just to save time, I want to dive back into nutrition because you touched on it, and that's kind of what we do best. And just the fact that to some people, right, it is just so obvious to us that, in this program we've been in RD that like, yeah, it's okay to have an ice cream cone. And to other people, it just seems like it is so obvious that is not okay. And that's just the history, like you said, the history of fad diets where fat was bad, then carbs were bad. And, it seems that people are drawing conclusions and deciding that they know, quote unquote, about nutrition from these things.
Yeah, that actually kind of breaks my heart. I saw this like stitched meme picture thing scrolling through social media. And on the left side, it was the clown that was Stephen King's It, right? Like that crazy creature. And on the right side, it was Ronald McDonald. The caption was, "I killed way more people than you." And it just kind of broke my heart because there's no information in that comic or cartoon or whatever you want to call it. But now it's just common knowledge now that Ronald McDonald's a mass murderer. And there's absolutely no context applied to what that was at all.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, but it's polarizing, and it got people thinking, and it's with all the diet fads. You really just have to love the consistency of every decade or so, somebody cherry picking a study, vilifying a macronutrient or a food group, and making $1 billion off a New York Times bestseller list. And the irony is we don't have much left. We did low fat for a couple decades, made a lot of people sick. We're kind of on a tail end yet resurgence of low carb, which is still kind of baffling. But pretty much honestly, now all that's left is if we can go extremely low or no protein. And then everybody can just sit around atrophied, lose all their gains, but be proud of how right they are. I mean, it really sounds like the great next logical step.
Basically, what you're saying is that is the next logical one in terms of macronutrients. But now people are doing things like attacking genetically modified foods. Now people are attacking farming methods. Now people are attacking transportation methods and the logistical methods of food delivery in terms of public health. So now it's not even like carbs are bad for you. It's like if this wasn't grown within 10 miles of you, it's going to kill you.
Yeah, food is bad for you.
Yeah.
Caveman didn't have food shipped 1,000 miles. Duh.
Oh, the things you know and the things you don't know. So to just kind of wrap up this whole thing, I'll just give 3 quick things that people can, we'll call it a frame shift because that's what our core program is called, the frame shift that people should work on experiencing or cultivating. And the first one is detaching, and we talk about this in the mindset episode as well, so circle back and listen to that one. Detaching from the result and the need to be right. Because if your identity is being right, you are in for a world of heartache. That's the second thing, is just understanding that being wrong only sucks if it's your identity, if your identity is being right. Otherwise, being wrong is an awesome opportunity to get better. And the last one being surrounding yourself with people that'll punch you in the eye when you think you know something and they know you don't know something. And that's, and it's people that care about the quality of your life, like spending years in the office with Jonathan and Trevor. Really, I knew macaroni and cheese was bad for me and I wouldn't touch it and I was scared of it. And Trevor, you're like, no, you ding dong, it's fine. And I am so glad you did, because I love macaroni and cheese.
What a great day that was, man. Mac and cheese.
And for all you Canadian listeners out there, what we are referencing is craft dinner.
You know, man, I know we kind of hammer this one a lot, but that last point, you know, like I said, Nick, you and I depriving ourselves of mac and cheese for years. It's just such a key point to have someone, you know, anyone who will be 100% brutally honest with you and let you know where you're not only doing well, but also where you're not doing so well. You know, establishing this whole safe place environment where you let others you trust know that it's not only okay for them to challenge you, but it's also encouraged and just downright necessary for your growth and development. Man, I think that is huge for continued success and, you know, continually improving and getting better every day. Because, you know, let's face it, we talk about it, but being self-aware, being objectively critical and honest with your strengths and your weaknesses is difficult. It's very difficult and it's very uncomfortable. But being part of a collective, whether it's a mastermind or having mentors, you know, or just having friends that can hold you to it, you know, some sort of sounding board that you trust to help you poke holes and expose flaws in your beliefs is just huge. You know, spending time with others, literally trying to hunt down cognitive bias and point out shortcuts, you know, hacks or false assumptions you're relying on erroneously, it's just invaluable and something I can't stress enough. If someone's not challenging you in some form or fashion, what are they doing in your life? You know, it's kind of one of those things where not everyone needs to be kicking you in the dick every day, but at the same time, you know, not everything should be roses and everybody shouldn't be telling you how great you are either. That's just kind of a false sense of security there, and it's going to set you up for failure.
Yeah, it goes right back to stress testing your ideas, and that's what Trevor did, right? I said, I can't eat macaroni and cheese. He said, why not? So, well, it's bad for you. He said, oh, that's interesting. Which ingredients are bad for you again? And so I like grabbed the box and I'm like looking at him like, I don't really know. He's like, oh, okay. He's forcing me to stress test my own beliefs. And we do some of this stuff in our elite and our inner circle programs. Jonathan, you actually put together like 99.9% of that program. So just elaborate on the stress testing of the ideas that they go through and the language that we use.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. One of the things that, you know, we go over with the elite stuff is just kind of this concept that assessing is greater than obsessing. You know, rather than just preoccupy yourself with things that you think are facts, actually evaluate them for their merit and their value. You know, it's going to just be a lot more productive to take that kind of analytical approach to collect information using an assessment tool or to take a measurement and use that to confirm your course or correct it than to just follow a path blindly because it's the one you're on and the one you're obsessed with. But the key here is to make sure that the assessment you use or the stress test is objective, not one that is influenced by your personal feelings or your opinions, but one that's guided by facts. If you have an answer in mind, it's very easy to go find it. But I think one of the easiest ways to test for this is to simply just step back, be honest, and ask, how's this working out for me? That super restrictive diet, man, how'd that work out for me? Run all the miles on all the days, how's that working out? The popular cayenne colon cleanse, I really hope no one listening fell for that one. But if you did, how'd it work out for you? Was that a good time? But I think the key here for me is making sure that all your plans, theories, behaviors, they stand up to that real world test, and allowing, those that pass, the ones that are effective, to determine your next actions, and not just basing those decisions on what feels right or sounds good at the time. And I think that's been key.
And that's probably one of my new tweetables is what I call them now, the things I steal from you guys. Replace your obsessing with assessing. I like that one.
It kind of makes sense. I mean, got to figure out what you want to focus on.
I'm a fan of alliteration. I like it just because it's alliteration. Without even assessing. I'm just obsessed.
Is that would that be assessing versus abscessing?
Oh my goodness.
You don't want to abscess.
you really don't want to abscess things.
No.
Yeah. Assess your abscess before you obsess.
Yes.
On that note, I'm calling it. That's all we got time for today, guys. Thanks for listening. Especially thanks for sticking through it. If you lasted this long with me being sick, just remember, if knowing is half the battle, then knowing what you don't know beats not knowing what you don't know, and simply is operating as if you do know it each and every time. Have a good one.
You've been listening to the Relentless Podcast. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to keep getting a little bit better every day, do us a favor, head over to iTunes, subscribe, leave us an honest review, and be sure not to miss the next one.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.